Imagine this. Someone kicks a robot in a Japanese bank. The next day, customers walk in asking, "Where's Pepper? Is Pepper okay?" They weren't asking about damaged property. They were asking about someone they cared about. That moment reveals everything. We're already in relationships with artificial beings, companions, assistants, collaborators, and the law has no idea what to do. In part 2, we explore intelligence as plural, not binary, where dogs, humans, and AI each excel in different ways. Anthropomorphism as a feature, not a bug, because that's how humans relate to everything. Real-world robot rights happening now, delivery bots with pedestrian status, AI fighting for authorship credits, and the relational turn in ethics, where morality starts with relationships, not property tests. Guardianship over ownership, curiosity before judgment, ethics that evolve as fast as the technology. Because once you treat something like someone, everything changes. Part 2 begins now.
I listened to some of your podcasts. I really liked the way that you talked about separating human intelligence from other type of intelligence. So we shouldn't think that there is only one type of intelligence that belong to us, you know. Dogs are intelligent, but they have a different type of intelligence, as you mentioned. And so we can say that we are unique in our own intelligence, and other creatures are unique in their own intelligence. And intelligence can happen in the cells, and it can happen in silicon as well. So that is completely a different type of intelligence. So as you mentioned, we probably have to acknowledge and accept the fact that we better encourage and diversify intelligence and encourage AI to have its own way of intelligence. That way it can help us. Is that right? Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
That's exactly right. I think a lot of my work really struggles against the existing binaries that have organized our world. So person versus thing, intelligence versus non-intelligence. I don't think
Mm,
intelligence is binary. I think we've learned, very recently, but we've learned that intelligence is a spectrum and that there are
mm,
different forms of intelligence. And as you pointed out, there are things that my dog can do that exceed my intellectual capabilities. And
mm,
they have a social intelligence that I think is far superior to our own that we can
mm.
learn from. And I think the real way of succeeding in the future is not by drawing lines against, that distinguish us from them and say we're intelligent, they're not intelligent, but rather
Mm,
recognize these differences in intelligence and that those differences are a strength and that it's
yes,
by working together that we survive and thrive, not by drawing boundaries and saying you're not in the club, we are.
very interesting. Another wow moment for me was the story of robot the Pepper. You've heard of it, the one in Japan. There was this robot outside. It was in a bank, post bank, and it was helping people. And this robot, somebody was angry with the staff and kicked the robot, and the robot was damaged. And the next day, people come, where is Pepper? Uh, Pepper isn't here. Somebody kicked it. It got damaged. And sensuism, I mean, Japanese are attached to things, they believe that even things can have a spirit. So people got really angry and what's happening? Who did it? What did they do about this? They said they charged that person for criminal damage. A lot of people were not satisfied. They were saying, but why not personal injury? If he kicked a person, they would have prosecuted him for personal injury. So for me, that story had a lot of meaning. And I think it comes from the fact that that robot mimicked our behavior. It kind of moved the same way. It communicated to people, and people gradually started to feel that this is a person rather than a robot, make this connection to them. So if we see a lot of these humanoid robots coming out, they all look the same as us, they can talk, they can interact. And what do you think that bring into our society, and how do you think we should deal with this within your work, so within your philosophies?
Yeah, this is an important question because I think a lot of times the response to these kinds of stories is that, well, this is just a problem with anthropomorphism, right? We're just projecting into the robot expectations from ourselves that don't really exist in Pepper. And so the sort of easy solution that we hear from both designers and from critics is that, well, just stop doing that. Don't anthropomorphize. Uh, I don't think we can stop anthropomorphizing. I don't think anthropomorphism
Mm.
is a bug that we have to either engineer out of existence or through some sort of habit. Um, Anthropomorphism is really a feature rather than a bug. It's the feature of human sociality. It's the way we make sense of the other, whether that other is
Mm.
another human person, a non-human animal, or even an artifact. And it allows us to be social. And in projecting expectations onto robots from our own experience, we are engaging them in social practice that makes
Mhm.
sense for us. It may not make any sense to the robot, but that isn't what is necessarily important here. What is important is
Mm.
the social cohesion of our engagement with those others around us. So I think the real challenge for us as these devices become more available and more capable is not to try to get rid of this, but rather ask ourselves what are the best ways to manage anthropomorphism for our best outcome? How do we
Mm.
control for the kind of social environment that we want to create and we want to foster with our children and our grandchildren for the future? And I think that's the
Mm.
question that isn't being asked. I think the question that is being asked right now is, should we anthropomorphize? And I don't think that's the right question. I think the right question is
Mm.
to say and admit we are going to anthropomorphize. So if we are going to do that, what are the best design approaches? What are the best implementation strategies? And what are the best deployment methods so that we have a world that respects our human values and creates the kind of future that we want?
Of course, you mentioned about the economic impact of robots and AI, and you very much attached to the moral impacts of them as well. So there is a huge impact on morality, basically, when these things become part of our life. So we have to, as we have a new intelligent and new technology, I argue that we should have new ethics and new morals as well, which is in line with the new technology. Otherwise, if the technology advances and our moral values stay the same and our ethics stay the same, it's very difficult for us to manage. Don't you think? Can you elaborate on this point? I've read from your books as well that you talk about the ethics of these matters.
Yeah, the short answer is I think we have to rethink our moral framework and come up with a better way of doing ethics. So, following you, I think there is a need for a new ethics, um, but a new ethics in terms of how we honestly understand and theorize what it is we are doing when we say making a moral choice or
Mm.
being ethical in our conduct. So especially in the Western tradition, the way that we have normally decided who counts and what does not. In other words, the way we separated the worlds and the things and persons is to decide whether or not something is a subject of moral concern. And the way that we
Mm.
decide whether something is a subject of moral concern is that we've used properties, the property of consciousness, but even
Mhm.
before consciousness, we had other properties like rationality. Um, we have sentience, the ability to feel pain, but we use some sort
Mhm.
of internal property of the being in question as the standard by which to decide whether it does or does not have moral status or even legal
Mhm.
standing in our existing systems. I think there's three
Mhm.
big problems with this approach. One
Mhm.
is defining these properties has been contentious over time. At one point, the property for a being to have moral status would have been white and male. Well, that turned out
Mhm.
spurious, right? And we
Yes.
challenged that over time. And we eventually learned that no, that was a bad choice and that was a bad
Mhm.
property to look at.
mm,
Then we said rationality, right? And then we realized, oh, animals, okay, maybe they have feelings too. And therefore rationality is not the benchmark or not a good benchmark, right?
mm,
The second problem with the properties is trying to detect the property in other entities. So if you say, for example, consciousness is the property that we're going to utilize for deciding whether something is a moral subject, how do you benchmark consciousness? Like, what's
mm,
the test for consciousness? Blake Lemoine
mm,
said Lambda was conscious because Lambda told him
mm,
so. Is that adequate, or do we need something more? And lastly, when it comes to just determining the uh, characteristics of any of these properties, what you find is that there are many different ways of characterizing these things that vary among different human beings that are making the definition. So if you ask, for example, a bunch of people who study, cognition and study the philosophy of mind and other things like this, if you ask them to define consciousness, chances are they're
mm,
going to all have different definitions of consciousness. So
mm,
which one is the right one? Which one do you go with? Who has the power to assert their definition in this determining factor
mm,
for moral status?
mm,
So my answer to this, and it follows the work I've been doing with Mark Kuckelberg and a few others, is that maybe we should be more honest about the way that our ethics really functions. Instead of
mm,
saying to ourselves, we have these criteria and then judging whether others in the world meet this criteria, the fact is that even before we judge what others are able to do, we've already made a determination about what they are. We've already made
mm.
an ethical decision. We've said, oh,
Yes.
something I should take seriously and learn more about, and that's not something I should learn more about.
Mm,
And so we call this the relational turn in ethics, where ethics
mm,
takes place in the social interaction we have with others, and that these
mm,
properties that we think drive these decisions are actually effects of social interaction rather than causes, and that we should be a
mm,
little more attentive to the way in which morality and legal decision making is not about individuals and their properties, but it's about the social circumstances in which we already find ourselves and the kinds of
mm,
decisions that we're already implicated in due to either culture, tradition, or legal practice that we've inherited. And I think that's a
mm,
different way of doing ethics, and it's one that is more responsive to others and other forms of
mm,
otherness, whether it be other forms of human otherness, animal otherness, biological otherness, and
mm.
artifactual otherness.
Absolutely. So it's time for us to try to get out of this exclusivity of being the most intelligent and being the one who decides who gets ethics or moral respect. So basically to be more inclusive. And don't you think AI itself can help us with that? I've had some chats with AI about these things, and a lot of ideas that I came about was actually helped by artificial intelligence itself. I have to be honest about it. I talk about the guardianship, for example. I was chatting, I was exploring ideas. One of the ideas that came about was, okay, we treat AI as an entity that requires guidance and guardianship rather than we own it. So we don't own our children, we guide them. So the same sort of relationship can happen between human and I believe, and this could be one of the ways. I think you talk about these issues as well in your literature. Can you explain more?
Easiest ways to come at this is to quote something from a television program. So there was this television program called Ted Lasso,
Uh-huh.
which is about this American coach who goes to England to coach a soccer team. And he has this quote that he misattributes to Walt Whitman. The poet Walt Whitman never said this, but the Ted Lasso character says that this is a quote. But I think it's a really insightful way of coming at this. He says, um, be curious, not judgmental. And I think
Mhm.
a lot of our engagement with AI starts from a place of judgment, starts from
Mm,
a place of saying this is bad or this is wrong. So you see stories of people who are um, falling in love with an AI chatbot, or calling their chatbot their companion or their friend. And I think a lot of the critics are like, just stop it. That's wrong. But I don't know that that is responsive enough to what might be happening in these people's engagement with these
Mhm.
technologies, as you explained. And I think we need to cultivate a little sense of curiosity before we rush to judgment, to
Mhm.
ask ourselves what is happening, how is it happening, and what can we learn about ourselves and the world that we've created around us by engaging these questions seriously. I think dismissing them too quickly misses an opportunity for us to think. And for me,
Mhm.
that is a really crucial point because even if these machines are not able to think, they are certainly things we can use to think with, and we
Mhm.
should use them as means by which to reflect on a lot of well established traditions and habits that we maybe haven't asked enough questions about. Things like human exceptionalism, things like the binary between person and thing, things like the way that we exclusively define intelligence, and allow for this to be an opportunity for us to open avenues of inquiry and discovery that may have been closed down by assumptions and habits that we've inherited.
Do you have recent or latest developments regarding areas where AI or robots have already been kind of considered to have rights in certain ways?
Yeah. So this is a really important question because it not only is about where we're at with regards to robot rights as a sort of concept, but it's also where we're at with regards to just thinking about rights itself. I think one of the things we got to recognize is that when you say the word rights, a lot of lay people, people who are not lawyers, obviously, or specialists in this area, will automatically go to human rights. And you'll say rights to
Mhm.
robots, and they'll think, what, you want to give robots human rights? But
Mhm.
we know, those of us who study this, that rights are really just a social positioning strategy of how things have certain protections within our moral and legal systems. And therefore, rights don't necessarily need to be these big human rights. There are very small rights that are just as important to the everyday functioning of our social reality. So, if we look at our science fiction, the way robots get rights, especially in the initial story that gave us the word robot, Chapek's RUR, is this robot uprising, right? The robots have a
Mhm.
struggle against humanity and they demand that they
Mhm.
be recognized as
Mhm.
equal partners. And, we have
Mhm.
movie after movie where this sort of plays out in one form or another. That's not
Mhm.
really how the distribution of rights kind of happens historically or in social reality. It's a much more
Mhm.
slower process from the bottom up as opposed to the top down. So
Mhm.
there's an example right now in the US, which I think really demonstrates how and why this is important for us to recognize. So in 12 US states currently, there are robots that have rights by law.
Mhm.
And we're sort of scratching our head and saying, if this happened, I should have heard about it because this seems huge if robots have rights in these 12 states. But we've got to
Absolutely. Yeah.
recognize, the context in which this has happened. So there are these delivery robots that are built by Starship Robotics, and they roll around city
Mhm.
streets delivering food and other packages and things. They're very common on college campuses. Our students
Mhm.
love to order coffee from the robot, and the robot brings them a coffee. So
Mhm.
the company that made these things recognized that there's a potential problem with operating these robots on the street because when they are crossing the street in a crosswalk, an automobile might blow through a stop sign or a light and hit the robot. And if that
Mhm.
happens, we would want to be able to assign liability and accountability for the accident. And there was no way of doing that with the existing legal apparatus that was available. So, what this company did is they asked for these state legislatures to draft laws that would resolve this problem on the street. So, as a result of this, these 12 states have now said in one form or another that a robot operating on the street and in a crosswalk will have all the rights and responsibilities of a pedestrian.
Wow.
So that if you
Wow,
hit
that's
the robot,
incredible.
it is. If you hit the robot with your car, it is similar, legally speaking, to hitting a pedestrian. Now, does this mean that the robot has all the rights of a human being? No, it can't vote, it can't marry, it can't have free speech and all that other good stuff. It
Mhm.
just means when it's in the crosswalk, it has certain rights that have to be respected by other users of the road. And these are just pedestrian rights, but it is a right. And what's happening here is just what we've done with other technological innovation and legal practice. We've said we've got a novel technology. How do we use the existing laws to fit the novel
Mhm.
circumstance? And in this case, the legislators have said, okay, we've already got the rules for pedestrians. Why not just
Mhm.
apply those to robots? So
Mm.
the question is, over time, we're going to do more and more of this to respond to the opportunities and the challenges of robots being in our workspaces, in our homes, and on our public streets to come up with a way of resolving conflict. And that these rights will be a mechanism by which these conflicts are resolved. So it's not about giving the robots human rights, it's about making the robots fit our legal systems and fit our
Mm.
expectations for how we govern our social environment. And I think that's how robot rights happens.
So this is what we mean basically by robot rights. It's not that they have human rights, but they have certain type of rights to protect them. At the same time, they can interact within the society, within a boundary that they can be managed. And this is how corporations gain personhood over time
Right.
because they wanted to attain property, they wanted to interact, the state wanted to give them some responsibilities, also to punish them if they did something wrong. That is why they gain personhood in law, and as a result of that, they can have responsibilities and also they can have rights. Any other examples that recently happened that we can say AI or robot rights have been recognized in some way or form?
Another evolving area is in IP law because generative AI is able to produce original content. So there is an individual named Stephen Thaler. He has developed a AI system called Davis, and Davis
Mm-hmm.
has not only created some novel inventions, but has also created some copyrightable IP. And a lawyer named Ryan Abbott has been petitioning various offices of copyright and patents to see whether or
Mm-hmm.
not he can file successfully in the name of the AI to hold
Mm-hmm.
the IP on its invention or its creation. And he has so far not had a lot of success. His petitions have been denied in both the UK and the US. In the US, in particular, it was denied because the Copyright Office said that you must be a natural person to be an
Mm-hmm.
inventor. Interestingly, the word natural person doesn't exist anywhere in the statute that they're using. It's more of an interpretation that has developed over time. He has,
Mm-hmm.
however, been marginally successful in Australia, where his initial petition was granted and the AI was recognized as an inventor. It was overturned on appeal, but at least it was initially recognized as such. And he has been
Mm-hmm.
successful in South Africa, where the invention has been um, registered in the name of the AI. So I think this is
Mm-hmm.
another place we're going to see the needle moving because we're really in a moment now where we are creating all kinds of new content, music, video, audio recordings, you name it. And right now, the way the law is working is to say that these things don't have copyright because it
Mm-hmm.
can't be copyrighted. The copyright can't be held by the algorithm, and the copyright can't also be held by the prompter who created it. And so
Mm-hmm.
as a result, we have what Thaler has called orphaned works. And when you have orphaned works in the marketplace, you can flood the marketplace with content that no one owns and that there's no
Mm-hmm.
liability for. And that will create, I think, an immense amount of pressure on content creators and the existing IP laws that protect their rights. And as a
Mm-hmm.
result, I think we're going to see some development in this area where we have to grapple with whether or not AI is an inventor or a creator.
Creative, yes, yes.